All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started here. It's 2 o'clock. So the title of the talk that we're giving today is Macs Get Sick Too. And first off, I'd just like to give a big thank you to Derbycon and Dave. This is really awesome. This is one of my favorite conferences of the year. Come in. It's always really fun. Everyone's really nice. Yeah, it's Dave's second career modeling in the unicorn. He looks really good. But yeah, so big thank you. Big shout out. So this is a talk I put together with a coworker of mine, Jacob Su. He lives in Singapore and unfortunately wasn't able to make it over here. We're both malware researchers at Palo Alto Networks. So, I'll have to lean over. Just kind of a little bit about us and some of our history. Jacob has worked in the government in Singapore, DSO, and the Ministry of Home Affairs, and then to Palo Alto Networks and the Global Security Response Team. And then my previous experience at Salesforce, General Dynamics, Fidelis Cybersecurity, and then at Global Security Response Team at Palo Alto Networks. And like I said, we're both malware researchers, and that Mario emblem there where he's smashing malware, that's what we try to do all day long. So just kind of a brief overview for you guys, a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So first off, we're going to go over a little bit about why care about Mac malware, a little overview of the landscape and kind of what's going on. And then we're going to start diving into setting up an environment and then looking at some malware. And hopefully it's fun, as much fun as Kermit's having there.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC.
Gesundheit, you okay?
No, I'm not okay. I have that virus that's going around.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, you better stay back. This one's a doozy.
That's okay, I'll be fine.
No, do not be a hero. Last year there were 114,000 known viruses for PCs.
PCs, not Macs. So, just grab this one.
I think I got a crash.
Hey, if you feel like that'll help, good.
So how many of you guys out there remember seeing all those commercials all the time? Yeah. Okay. So a lot of you guys. Cool. So that was kind of something that Apple was trying to put forward is, Macs, they don't get viruses. I hear that all the time from so many people that it's like immune. It can't happen. It's impossible. And this was actually on Apple's website back in 2012. This is a screenshot saying it doesn't get viruses. It's not susceptible. You can safeguard your data by doing nothing. You're just good. So they don't have that on there anymore. So, but a little bit of the reality. I love this quote by Charlie Miller. He said, Mac OS X is like living in a farmhouse in the country with no locks, and Windows is living in a house with bars on the windows in the bad part of town. And then that's a picture, actually. I love that picture. He gave a DEF CON talk, and he talked about building a cyber war team for North Korea, and so he photoshopped himself into all these pictures with the supreme leader. So he's a pretty good character. So a little bit more of the reality. Bit9 put together a report, and they said 2015 was the most prolific year in the history of OS X malware, and there were 5 times more OS X malware appeared in 2015 than the previous 5 years combined. So there's definitely a trend and an uptick. And then also this was from 2015. Mac OS X won this list. This is not the list that you want to win, though, of the highest number of vulnerabilities found. And then iPhone was next after it. And this chart here, we can see a little bit of kind of a trend as well, the increasing number of vulnerabilities. And I mean, that might just be because more people are looking at it as well. More people doing research. Because it's definitely getting more popular. I know when I look around here at a lot of these conferences, I see tons of people with Macs, tons of people are using them. Enterprises are starting to use them a lot more. They're becoming a lot more enterprise friendly. According to net market share, they made up about 5% of the desktop market share. I think it's definitely growing, at least from my experience looking around. Here we have another chart that a coworker of mine, Claude, wrote. And it just showing again just kind of the uptick in the different kind of malware families. He broke it out into, or not families, but different types. He kind of broke it out, and we can just see definitely on the rise. And then this was a fun one. I used virus total intelligence, and I just wanted to count the number of hashes and then the virus names. And it was kind of hard because a lot of the different AV engines use like all these different weird names. But Sophos had a pretty good naming convention. And just over like the past couple years, I think I did, and counted the number of hashes. And it was kind of no surprise that adware like clear is the biggest number of at least samples and hashes out there. Install core was almost 50%. And we see that definitely a lot on the Windows side as well. Tons of adware with that. And then Genio is another popular one that we see a lot. So now we're going to get into just setting up a little bit of an analysis environment for dealing with Mac malware. I get this question quite a bit. Not a lot of people have looked at Mac malware or know how to set up an environment. So the first thing is we need a virtual machine. You don't want to be running this on a real system, obviously. Anybody that's done malware analysis. And then according to Mac's license agreement, you need a Mac to do that. I'm sure we're at a conference with a bunch of hackers. You guys probably know how to run that on other systems, but at least according to Apple's licensing, you need a Mac, and then you can run 2 additional copies with that. And my favorite virtualization software that I like to use is VMware Fusion. It's so easy to set up a Mac environment. You just like a couple clicks, file new, install OS X from the recovery partition, and you have a VM that you can snapshot and start analyzing malware with. So once we have our VM, there are a couple security features that Apple builds in that we need to disable in order to be as vulnerable as possible, I guess. So the first thing is disabling Gatekeeper, and that's kind of like a whitelist you can think of. And that's in your security and privacy, and you just want to have it allow all applications so you can run whatever. And then Apple also includes Xprotect, and you can think of that as kind of like a blacklist. And that's Apple updates that with different either hashes, or as we'll see in a second, Yara as well. But for that, we just want to, if you're going to have your VM on the internet, prevent it from getting updates. But most of the time when you're doing analysis, you're not going to have it on the internet anyways. You can delete the Xprotect signature files, or else if a file does get quarantined, if you're looking at something old that's known, it's just an extended attribute that you can remove with this XATTR-D, and then the quarantine attribute you can remove. So I did mention also that Xprotect does come with Yara support now, which is pretty cool. There's this file in your Xprotect bundle, xprotect.yara, and it contains like over 50 rules. So if you guys want some free Yara rules to look at, you can just jump into that file. This is an example of one of them that's in there for Key Ranger. It's just right in there. It's kind of cool. The other thing that we want to disable is system integrity protection. This was introduced with El Capitan, and they called it like rootless at first, and in effect, there's still a root account, but it's just a root account that can do less. So it restricts things like detracing, debugging of protected apps, no kernel debugging, only signed kernel extensions, no modifying NVRAM. And this is kind of a fun little cartoon that I really like on the side here. If someone steals my laptop while I'm logged in, they could read my email, take my money, impersonate me to my friends, but at least they won't be able to install drivers. So at least we're good there. I think that's like a common thing in security, right? Like you can do all these other things, but no drivers. That's good. And then also the system integrity protection also has a list of protected files, and that's in this file in your system library sandbox rootlist.conf. There's a list of exceptions. It's in another file. And then in effect files are given this extended attribute as well, com.apple.rootless. And then on the right here we can see just kind of some directories from Apple's website that are protected. System, user, bin, all the things you'd think of. So we want to disable that when we're doing malware analysis because we want to be able to do things like detracing, kernel debugging, all that. So how we do that is, especially in a VM, this is kind of tricky. You have to reboot the VM and then hit Command-R right when you're booting up. And it takes me like so many times to get that right. I don't know why. It's like, that's like the hardest part of it. Maybe of all of this is to get that. But then once you boot up, you launch the terminal, go to utilities, and there's a utility that they include, csrutil. You just run that csrutil disable. And you can do csrutil status and look at everything that's in there. The other way that you can disable system integrity protection is if you get a signed kernel extension code signing certificate from Apple. Those are kind of difficult to come by, from what I've heard. I think they'll give them to only companies, and you have to have a good reason and a few different special keywords I've heard, and you can maybe get one. But it's easier just to do it the other way. But interestingly, this kind of opens up an interesting technique that malware could use to detect if it's running in an analysis environment, because to analyze the malware, we need to disable system integrity protection. And you can check to see if system integrity protection is disabled from userland with this CSR check API. So malware could just call that, and then if SIP is disabled, it's probably going to be running in an analysis environment, and just don't do anything bad, pretend like you're good and close or whatever. So that's kind of interesting. Stefan Esser also has, he kind of showed me this, that there's some undocumented commands with csrutil though. It's kind of interesting. You can do -- without, and then disable like certain features, like only the ones that you want, while keeping it enabled. So like without kernel extension, signing, without dtrace restrictions, so forth. So time is it? Malware surfing time. Now we'll get to the fun stuff. That's all the boring stuff, right? Like setting it up and all that. So now we'll kind of dive in, look at a few different malware samples, and go through that. So the first sample we're going to talk about is this Sophisy complex sample, and there's a blog that we're going to be posting with this, I think upcoming, talking about it. It's a sample that I analyzed with a couple of coworkers of mine, Danny Cruz and Rob Falcone. So the first thing we need to know when we're reversing OSX samples, usually x64, Macos, we also need to know about Objective-C. So the first thing is the calling convention on x64. And we can see at the bottom the Linux, BSD, and Mac, the way arguments are pushed for a call into these registers, RDI, RSI, RDX, RCX, R8, R9. And then I listed a reference here. I'll make these slides available. But this guy has an awesome website for a lot of really good low-level details, agner.org. That's where this chart came from here. So as I mentioned, the other thing when you're reversing Objective-C, you're going to see all these Objective-C message send calls. And that sends a message for a simple return value to an instance of a class. So the first argument that you're going to see pushed into those registers is an argument to self, and then the next argument is actually the operation for the method that's going to be called. So that's what we want secondly. And then any arguments that are passed to that API call come after that. So just as an example from the initial dropper of this Sophisy complex sample, we can see we're setting up a call, and we can see that the string with format API is pushed into RSI with the move command I highlighted in red there. And then you get all the way down to the call to message send. So that's kind of a pain in the butt when you're reversing. Thankfully, we do have Hopper has pretty good decompiler for this. So when we look at the initial dropper in Hopper, we can see pretty much exactly what it's doing. It's a lot easier to read than looking at the assembly there. So this is the main function. We can see some string with format calls, a PDF, and then there's also, we're writing that to a file, and then we're going to open that in preview, and that's actually like a decoy document. We'll see on the next slide. And then it's also writing this file /temp content in the middle, if you can see. And then it's going to make that file executable, and then it's going to launch that /temp content. And then this is a picture of the decoy document. It looks kind of like a aerospace type thing. It's all in Russian. That's just to kind of like trick the user that, hey, this is okay, no big deal. We just have this cool PDF. That's all that happened. And then just a little bit, this next layer, that temp content file, is actually what's going to be setting up the persistence. On a Mac, there's tons of different locations for persistence. You know, almost like Windows, there's tons of ways to set up persistence as well. Sorry, that monkey makes me laugh. So we have like launch agents, launch daemons. We have like old school like cron ways of setting up persistence, like Linux ways. All kinds of ways here. And then I also included a reference from Patrick Wardell's talk this year at RSA. He covered quite a few of them. But that persistence layer that we mentioned, that /temp content file that gets launched, that is going to use launch agents for its persistence. And we can see that here. There's a plist, XML type stuff. First, it's getting set up, and then it's making a directory. And then it's going to write a kext.d. It's going to write the plist file and then a shell script, start.sh. It's going to make those executable, and it's going to run the start.sh script. And that's kind of common with a lot of Mac malware, just like a bunch of like duct tape, like shell scripts and things like that, which is kind of interesting. So we look at the start shell script. You're just adding the plist item that it wrote to set up persistence. And that plist item is just XML, and we can see what it looks like here, running at load for that kernel extension that we had. And then so that kernel extension, that kext.d, it's not really kernel extension. This is the final payload, and we look at the main argument for that. We have an am I being debugged function, as well as a connected to the internet. And then a sleep if it's not connected to the internet, and then we're going to call a subroutine after that that does a lot of the main bad stuff. So that first call, the am I being debugged, is actually kind of funny. It's just a CopyPasta thing from the internet. I found this originally on like OSX Reverser's GitHub. He had like an example, the same exact name of the function, am I being debugged? All the code was exactly the same. And then they found it even, a coworker of mine, Rob, actually found it on a forum from Apple like back in 2004, like this exact function, so it's kind of interesting. And it's basically just a call to sysctl there, and then it's going to check to see if the ptrace flag. And then it'll know if the debugger's found and then remove itself. This wasn't in the sample, but this was kind of a fun, interesting one. The ptrace calling that, and you can actually call it with a pt deny attach. And if the sample's already being debugged and currently being traced, it'll just exit. Otherwise, if you call that earlier and then you try to debug later, it'll actually crash the sample and cause a segmentation fault. And then we had that next function, just that connected to internet. And the malware is just doing a GET request, simple GET request to Google. And it just wants to check to see if it has internet access before it contacts any of its C2s to try and hide some of the domains it's going to talk to. So if that succeeds, it's not being debugged. It can connect to the internet. I mean, those are kind of common things a lot of malware want to do. See if it's being analyzed, and see if it has internet. Then it's going to start doing its bad stuff. It's going to create this hello message where it's going to get all kinds of information about the OS and then package that up for a post request. This is the get OS info function, and we can see it's going to collect all sorts of things, username, the process list, all that jazz. And then it's going to decode the C2 servers out. And if you guys have looked at malware or done reversing, you can probably see that this is just kind of like a simple XOR loop, looping around and XORing with a multi-byte XOR key that we have at the bottom here. And then it's doing that over just a buffer of bytes to decode the C2 servers. So when we're doing this, a really simple way just to do this with Binary Ninja. It's like a new reversing tool that I really love. They have a nice API where you can just import Binary Ninja, and then you load it up, the Mako, and then you're looking at this in a disassembler already, so it's easy just to pull the bytes out using their API. So we grab the XOR key at that location, then we're going to grab the server data at another location, and then we just have a function to do the multi-byte XOR, and then we're just going to loop over every 24 bytes and decode the C2 servers. And these are some of the servers that were decoded. appleupdate.org, appleiClouds.net, iTunes-helper.net. And those have been associated with Sophosy in several different campaigns. And then also we can see that it's definitely trying to kind of social engineer users if that's seen that, somebody like a junior person might see that and be like, oh, this is just Apple Update, it's okay, it's not bad, so I don't know. So after we do all that, this is an example of the post request, the initial hello message. And I generated this just with the malware environment. We had our VM, and then I just have another Linux VM, and I'm using something like inetsim to simulate internet services, and then setting that as the default gateway for it to connect to. And here we just have the post request. All that garbage is just encoded with a similar XOR algorithm. And it's all the system information that we saw that the malware was collecting. And then it posts that out and then does other stuff. So the next sample I wanted to show, recently Palo Alto, we did a LabyREnth CTF, and we had all kinds of different challenges. This is a picture here of the winners. My boss made like a pew map of like every time somebody won, it like pewed out. It was kind of fun. I like sat there for an hour and went back and forth. So yeah, we had like almost 40 challenges or something like that, all kinds of different tracks, Windows, Unix, docs, mobile, threat, and random. And there's one in particular I wanted to look at here. It was an OSX sample that I wrote. But we also gave out all kinds of cool prizes, money for the winners, $5,000 for the first person to solve all the challenges. And I feel like they probably earned it because I felt like we kind of overdid it. That was kind of a lot of challenges for one person to do, almost 40. So it was kudos to those guys. So yeah, like I said, that challenge, the LabyREnth CTF, it was kind of like supposed to be a ransomware type challenge. And it would go through and decrypt all your PNGs in your downloads folder if you ran it. And then it would pop up this image, congratulations, all your PNGs belong to us, pay us all your monies, as like a joke. But actually CryptoWall actually has that in their message where like, congratulations, you've become a part of the CryptoWall community. Like, it's like you really got something good, right? But we did include like a decrypt command line argument, so in case somebody actually did run it. And there, I mean, I don't know what it would encrypt, just your PNGs in your download folder, but. So when we're looking at this, the first thing we might want to do is run like dtrace, and that's kind of like an strace on Linux. I usually just run it with like sudo dtrust and then the program, and then you're going to see all the API calls that are made. There's also a lot of other useful recipes on like those links there. Another dynamic utility you might want to use is fs usage, and you can monitor like all the file system activity with that. OSX also has all kinds of dynamic information just built in to the logs. You can view that with the console.app. Just popping that up, you can look at a lot of these logs. Otherwise, if you wanted to be more like a command line cowboy, you can just kind of tail or look at some of these different locations here. And then there's like a full list of a lot of the different forensic artifacts at these links at the bottom. It's kind of the reason I wanted to show this. I haven't seen a lot of Swift malware, or really like any, but I think it's interesting. It's like a new language that Apple's come out with. It's a type-safe language. Runs on Mac and I think Linux as well. And then you can, the coolest thing about it, really the only thing you need to know is that you can code with emojis, which is pretty awesome. So you can have a poop class, chickens. So that's pretty fun. So one of the main things when you open up a Swift example to start reversing it, you're going to see all the names are mangled and really ugly. So here we have an example of the ransom message function in the middle there on the left. And then I wrote like a Swift demangler script based on there's a guy named G. Singh Gulshan. He wrote this is kind of the one I got the idea from, and it's just shelling out using a executable in Xcode to demangle the names. And he had it so like if you had a Mac version, you can do it. And I only have a Windows version of IDA because IDA is like insanely expensive, and you can only get it on one particular platform at a time. So I needed to kind of like come up with a little bit a different workaround for it. Hopper also has one as well. And then just if you want to learn more about Swift reverse engineering, a guy named Ryan Stortz gave a really good presentation at InfiltrateCon earlier this year. The link there. And I think Gulshan was going to write one for Binary Ninja at some point too, doing some demangling. Perfect. Yep, exactly. Cool. So yeah, Binary Ninja already does that. That's right from the source, so cool. Is this like, the resolution looks really messed up for the demo. Yeah, it's going to be hard to see. Zoom in at all? Oh yeah, that's really bad. Yeah, sorry guys. I had quite a few video demos I was going to be showing you, but I don't know how well that's going to work. It's pretty bad. And this is just kind of showing a script using the Windows basically you run the first script, it'll get you all the mangled functions, and then you're going to run another script from within OS X to just to shell out to run the utility built into Xcode, and then demangle all those names, get those names, and then you're going to put them back into IDA in Windows. So anyways, after that demo, we were going to see that there's an interesting function called just get password, and the malware was actually just calling this get password function to get the password that it was going to use to encrypt the different files. And here we can see it's really simple. There's just a byte array, and then there's a password. Here I am floating around in my tin can far above the moon. And then it's going to return a string from that. So a really easy way to solve this challenge is we can just use OS X debugger, LLDB. And it's really similar. It has a lot of the aliases for GDB, if you guys are familiar with GDB. And there's also LLVM has a LLDB to GDB mapping that contains all the aliases that you would need. So things like R to run the program, B, and then you can do a function and address, and B, RL, you can list all the breakpoints, BTC, the backtrace, RER, read the registers. A lot of the commands were a lot more verbose, and then they started adding a lot of these other aliases. FRV, show the args and local vars. DI will show the current function that you're in. Otherwise, you can specify one. S is going to be a single step, if you guys are familiar with debugging. That's step in, so you're just going to be stepping through a program. Otherwise, N is step over, so if you see a call, it'll actually not go into that function, you'll just step over it. And then fin will say you accidentally go into that and you don't want to be there, you can just do that command and step out. Otherwise, the X command, you can examine different parts of memory, then repeat that a certain number of times, and then you specify a format string, like X for hex usually, or like S for a string, as we'll see, and then you can specify a size and then an address. Another unique one is the PO. You can print Objective-C descriptions. So here we have an example. This one might work a little bit better. Just showing, we have our cat, and then we're going to run that. Is that? Oh. Oh, yeah, I was zooming with it. Back? No? Okay. Hopefully that'll work. Oh, man. There we go. Computers are hard. Sorry, guys. So we're just going to launch the malware with LLDB. And it was named Krypto. And then I usually put like a .danger extension, especially with like Windows malware. That'll make it so you can't run it, but it doesn't really do anything on Mac. It's probably like an old habit. So we want to put a breakpoint. In that other demo, we looked at the end of that get password function at the very end. and then we just put a breakpoint there, and that's the location that we specified. And then we ran it, and we stopped there, and then we're going to read the registers, and a return value, if you guys aren't familiar with auto reversing, will be in the RAX register. So we're going to use that examine command to look at the memory at the location of, you can specify a register with $RAX, so this, we want to see the string at that register. And we can see the key for that challenge was ground control 2 to Major Tom. And then we can do C, we can continue, and we can see the little pop-up that says all the PNGs belong to us. And then we renamed like the extension .labby, like a lot of ransomware will do. It'll put their unique extension after all the files that they encrypt. But like I said, we did include this decrypt command line argument. There was like one guy on Twitter that didn't seem very happy about this challenge. I mean, we wanted to make it kind of like realistic that you're analyzing malware and looking at it for the challenge, so hopefully you don't run it on a real system. And then he found this function, and he was better, I think, so. So the next sample we're going to look at is the Hacking Team RCS. And this is a map from Citizen Lab in 2014. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Hacking Team since they were breached. They were an Italian offensive security company that sells a lot of offensive security tools to a lot of different governments around the world. And the sample we're going to look at is their OS X version of RCS. So the first thing they'll do, just like when you're looking at Windows malware, the process really transfers over really easy between Windows and Mac. It's kind of the same, a lot of the same skills apply. When Windows, you look at it like in P Studio or some of those tools. First tool I like is the Mako View OS X Reversers fork of that. I'll open it up in that and just kind of start looking around. And we can see there's a segment, the E frame, and we can see it's a protected version under the flags. Or if we didn't open it in Mako View, maybe we'd open it up in IDA, and it would just tell us that this is useless because it's encrypted, and we can either keep going or not going. So this is Apple. This is actually Apple's built-in anti-analysis binary protection. And some malware will use this because there's no decryption stub actually in the malware. It's all Apple's doing this in the kernel. It's using blowfish encryption, and Apple really designed it to help protect against piracy. So there's this unprotect DSMOS segment. I think that's don't steal Mac OS. And you can see all the code there off to the right. You can, an interesting thing I didn't really know before kind of diving into a lot of this is that Apple's kernel's all open source. You can just look at it online, opensource.apple. And download it and look at it. So that's the actual code. You probably can't see it. It's too small, but for doing this. There's a kernel extension on everybody's Mac running that's don't steal Mac OS X. And then that's going to help decode these segments with an SMC key. Our hard work by these words, guarded, please don't steal. Is it really? Oh, nice. Very cool. So we can do this with a known malware sample. This was from the Cerbero blog a while back. Initially, this malware sample started off with around 20 to 25 detections, and then they encrypted it, and then it went to 0 for 47. Something that might be useful for some of you pen testing guys out there. So if we get a sample that's protected, let's go ahead and decrypt it. The first thing we can do is use OTool and then -L and look at it. And we want to look for flags 0x8, and that's for the SG protected version. And then class dump has a built-in deprotect tool that we can use to deprotect that. So this is just a little demo showing that. I ran the OTool to start with. Hopefully you guys can see that with the 0x8 flag. We can see that segment's protected. And then we run deprotect with help, and super easy to run, just deprotect and then the binary, or we can specify the architecture. And then you specify the output file as well. We did .decrypted. And so after we ran that, now we'll run otool again. And sorry, I got a new keyboard here as I'm like screwing up. My hands were kind of hurting, so I was trying this like Kinesis keyboard. It's like, I don't know, it's kind of hard and weird to type on, but. And we want to look at the new decrypted file, and we can see that that flags is set to 0 now, so it's decrypted. The other option we have is, this is a paid tool, Cerbero Profiler, but it does all kinds of stuff, not just Mac, Mako parsing. It can do a lot of Windows stuff, Swifts, docs, PDFs. I really like it for PDFs because you can just look at all the streams really easily. And then it even has like a built-in JavaScript debugger. But Cerbero will actually decrypt the segment for you, so you can just look at it right in there, which is kind of cool. And Cerbero is also Graeber approved, so that's how you know it's good, right? I found this on on the old website, and he had like a really passionate testimonial about it. And then there's Dave at I think this is the DEF CON shirts with Matt on them. So actually with that sample, it doesn't really help us that much because there's another packer on top of that. So it's kind of like, yo dog, I heard you like packers, so we put a packer in your packer so you can pack while you pack. And then just a little bit about packers on the Mac scene. There's only kind of a couple main ones. On the Windows scene, there's like all kinds of them. But UPX is pretty common, just like on Windows, and that's super easy to unpack just with UPX and then -D. And then the binary. Otherwise, if they break it, it's pretty easy to break UPX, so it won't automatically unpack with that. You can just do it in a debugger pretty easily. Looking for the jump. It has a tail jump, just like the Windows version. We can see an example down there in the bottom, the jump RAX. The other main one is just MPress, and that one has like an initial stub that executes, that unpacks the original code, and then also another stub. And then the second stub will execute, and then that'll jump into the original code. So that one's really easy to just see that tail jump back into DYLD start for the original code. And OSX Reverser put out an MPress dumper. I haven't really tried it, but that might work as well if you get a sample. It's worth trying. But this sample actually has its own custom packer that the hacking team developed. And there's a really easy way to get around it by just dumping the memory. OSX Reverser has a tool for that called readmem, and we'll show a little example using that. So here we look at our first initial file, just doing strings, and we can't see anything in there. And then we're going to run it and just pipe any errors or output to null so it doesn't mess up the pretty demo. So now we ran it, and now we're going to look at top. So any of you guys do IR or SOC people recognize anything in there that doesn't look good? The PID, any of them look kind of weird? Oh, not that one. I was trying to highlight it as it was like jumping around. It's like that long random name, right? Anytime you see anything with like a weird random name, it's probably something bad. So 406 is the PID that we want to look at. So now we'll run readmem with -- help, and just to show all the different options that we have available to us. We want the -m for this example, which is going to dump the main binary for it. So we do sudo readmem. We specify that PID that we saw, and we're looking at it in top, or if we use like activity viewer, I think it's called on Mac, or Objective-C's utilities, the Task Explorer. And then we dump it to the .dump, and we want -m. Type the password, and we can see that it all dumped out for us nicely. And then now if we look at strings of this unpacked file in memory. What's that? It's just a Mako, like you can open it up in IDA, yeah. Well, sort of. I mean, some things aren't perfect with it, but we'll see in a second. It's easy enough to analyze, especially when there's like symbols with it and things. And then here I'm just showing strings, and I know there's a couple symbols in it for stealing Firefox passwords. I did a grep just so we don't see all the garbage in there as well. So yeah, if we pop that up in any disassembler, here we just have IDA, and it's really nice. We get all this symbol information with it, which is like really helpful just to see what all the different functions are doing. We have stuff like steal Firefox passwords that we already saw, turning on your webcam. You know, if some government wants to see people naked, I don't know. It's probably punishment enough for them. But, yeah, all kinds of like espionage type functions in there. Does all kinds of stuff. It's like does a ton of features. And then so this implant actually has a kernel component as well, a rootkit. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about doing kernel debugging in case you need that. So as far as setting that up, like I said, you can just download the kernel right from opensource.apple.com. And then you need to download and install Xcode, and then download the kernel debugging kit for the version that you have. And then another kind of cool thing too is since it's all open source, you can compile your own kernel. So if you wanted to change some things, I don't know, whatever you might want to change, or maybe you're doing some research and want to do something, you can compile it pretty easily. Just using once you install Xcode and the command line utilities, just doing a make. And then you're going to get the kernel file that you're going to copy into your VM. And then Apple's recommended way is to do like a touch on that file that you copy in there. Otherwise, you can, if you want to be like a cowboy, you can just remove the kernel cache that's in there and then reboot. And then when you come back in, you can do a uname-a, and you should see that it's your kernel now that you compiled. And that's kind of cool because you know that it's the exact version that you have, and then you have all the symbols for it and everything already. And then so how to get into kernel debugging, you'll start up, well, we need to disable SIP like we already did if it's El Capitan. And then we need to set bootargs. And then there's a command on the left with the flag 0x44, and we can see all the different options. And then we need to trigger an NMI event. And that's like, Apple is really fond of these like twister finger combinations. So that one's actually like kind of hard. It's like command option control shift escape, and you have to like maybe hit escape with like your tongue or something. I don't know. Other hand, it's weird. So that's kind of hard. But then once you get that, the screen should freeze, and then you have your host system. You run LLDB. If you compiled it, you can do it from the kernel source folder. It's going to prompt you to run some debug scripts that will give you a bunch of extra macros, and then KDP-remote, and then the IP of your VM, and you can enjoy your kernel debugging. Here we just have a little example of that. Let's see that, all right? Is that kind of? So we'll launch it up. We're running the debug script. And we'll do KDP remote. And the IP address, and then we'll start debugging. And then we can do like a backtrace. You can see, you know, where we are. I think I ran like a KDP help right there, and it's easier almost if you just jump in and start messing with it, and then doing help and the KDP help, and you can see like there's all these macros for you that do all kinds of useful things. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can just like read through and look at all the cool stuff that you can do. Nice one if you're doing kernel debugging is show all kext. So kext is like a driver on Windows, a kernel extension. So if you do show all kext, you can see all the current drivers that are running and where at. Kind of jumping around here. And then we have all the LDB commands that we used earlier, register, read, etc. So we can skip ahead there. Just for conclusions now, as we saw, when we started off, Apple's been really big on kind of setting forth this thing that Macs aren't vulnerable to malware at all, that it can't happen, kind of, which has kind of changed a lot recently. Especially as like the targeting's gone up now more for Macs. I think more people are starting to look at Macs. It's kind of like a really green field. There's a lot of areas for research that are kind of open for people to look at. So as there's more research, more targeting as well. And just kind of in anything, just computing safely on Macs. This is something I would have my mom always use, is like only allow them apps from like the App Store or identified developers, or maybe just the App Store only for most people is probably fine. And then there's an OS X lockdown script in GitHub. That's really nice. It'll secure your Mac installation a lot with a lot of good defaults. Patrick Wardell, Objective-C, he has a lot of really good utilities. One is like Knock Knock, that'll show you any persistence mechanisms that malware might do. That's something all malware wants to do, right? It wants to persist for a while, and then it wants to talk out on the network. So he has all kinds of cool stuff. There's a Task Explorer one as well, that you can like filter all your processes, almost like a Process Explorer, and then you can show ones that are packed or not packed, all your signed ones, not signed ones, and then it also have a virus total score for you, which is really helpful. And then also, common sense hygiene. If you're on an unsecured network, using a VPN. I like that Freedom one from F-Secure. And then also Chrome on a Mac, I think, is probably the most secure. Blocking Flash, using uBlock Origin, Privacy Badger, HTTPS everywhere. And then I also like Little Snitch as well. There were some pretty bad vulnerabilities earlier, I think, this year with Little Snitch, but they patched them, and I still think it's pretty cool. It's useful to know any of the outbound traffic on your Mac. And then that's all. So I guess we have maybe like a couple minutes maybe for like a question or anything, if anybody has anything. We're good? Oh, going. Are there any significant changes with Sierra? I haven't really had a chance to look at it much to know for sure yet, and it just kind of came out. I'm excited to see all the people complaining about it on like Twitter as usual, like the first month, and then maybe I'll jump in and start looking at it more. But yeah, I don't know. So, good question. Oh, really? Okay. Cool. So more secure code signing stuff you mentioned. So is that all? Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for coming. Appreciate it. All right, take care.